Alright guys, today's video is going to be weird as fuck. So ever since I was a child, dressed as a skunk for some reason, this is the only picture I could find, I've had this hobby thing where I design really elaborate imaginary sequels to my favorite games. The games that really stick with me. It's something I'm sure everybody has done once or twice before. It's fun as hell to imagine what could have been. So today we are going to participate in a little thought experiment. I've spent literally fucking years thinking about how I would personally design a third entry into one of my favorite series, Prototype. And today I will be shotgunning you in the face with nearly a fucking hour's worth of my embarrassingly in-depth ideas for this franchise. We'll be covering the powers, traversal, the environment, and the story of this non-existent game. And I'll be using footage of the originals alongside some of my own stunted sketches to get these ideas across, to help paint a picture in your mind. Hopefully you can fill the rest of the blanks in yourself. With that all out of the way, strap in, folks. Let's make a game! Let's make a game!
The main attraction.
We all know the powers are the best part of the Prototype series. Carving through hordes of hapless NPCs with your wriggling, shape-shifting spike arms is the main reason people play these two absurd-ass games, so we're going to start with those. Both games had 5 main offensive powers, so what we're going to do is double down on that. And I mean that literally. There are now 10 offensive powers instead of 5, all of which I will break down for you very soon. Oh, I already mentioned this once, but you're going to have to deal with my crude caveman-ass pieces of concept art throughout this video. I'm not a pen and pencil artist, these are just loose sketches to try to get my ideas across to you guys, so please, God have mercy. Back on topic, along with the melee arsenal doubling, I'd also like to throw in 3 entirely new ranged powers for Alex to use, allowing the player to tackle enemies up close or from a distance, depending on what kind of enemy they're fighting, or just how they feel like fighting at any given moment. Ranged powers would add a huge degree of flexibility when tackling situations head-on, allowing more player freedom in terms of how you want to cut motherfuckers up into tiny edible meat cubes. So we got 10 melee powers and 3 ranged abilities so far, but we're not stopping there. Alex has to have a packed arsenal of interesting transformations, so instead of just 1 armor ability, we're gonna have 3. Alongside this wide variety of melee powers, ranged powers, and armor sets are 5 Devastator attacks and 6 firearms that can be picked up from Blackwatch forces and used against them. With all of these features combined, Prototype 3 hypothetically has 27 different ways to murder your makers. Now that we have all the basics laid out, let's get to talking about the specifics of these powers, starting with the tried and true classics, the melee powers. First and foremost, half of the melee powers in this new game are powers that have been seen before in the series, but most of them have little new tweaks to make them feel fresh. Let's cover these returning 5 first, so I can ease you into the outright fucking weirdness that is the last half of the power set. Alright, number 1, the Whip Fists. So, real quick, what you see on screen right now are the stats of the weapon. Each weapon has a speed, damage, and range stat, all of which can go from 1 to 5, 1 being the least powerful and 5 being the most powerful. The stats of the Whip Fists are 5, 3, and 3 because it excels at a distance while remaining fairly middle of the road when it comes to damage dealt and the speed of the attacks. And yes, you heard that right, Whip Fists. We're getting plural up in this bitch. In this newest entry, Alex gets a whip for an arm on each side, and if you need a visualization for how whipping these bastards around would look in-game, just take a look at the Blades of Chaos from God of War, because that was my basis. These things would tear through crowds of blacklight zombies and Blackwatch soldiers like a searing knife through butter. They're great for keeping a distance from stronger enemies while avoiding damage and recovering health. Number 2, the Glaive. Everybody knows the blade arm. Everybody loves the blade arm. We're keeping the blade arm. I'm currently calling it the Glaive, just so I don't have to say blade arm anymore. The big-ass sword is back, and better than ever, because it can stretch and spin now. Sounds weird, let me explain. I never understood why Alex Mercer didn't ever stretch his limbs outside of using the Whip Fists. Like, if this is something you can do, why don't you implement it into every power to keep your enemies at a distance, at least by a few feet? So now, during certain attacks, Alex will extend his arm forward, giving the blade a bit more range than ever before. It doesn't have Whip Fist level range, but it's also not as close quarters as, say, the claws. Alongside a bit of newfound range comes the ability to spin the blade on an axis. Here, let me show you. Okay, it's like this. It's gonna spin around, and it's gonna keep. This looks really stupid. Picture, if you will, running down the street with the shield equipped in Prototype. Now, mentally replace that shield with a 7-foot spinning blade that's chopping up motherfuckers like the rotor of a helicopter. Moving on to number 3, the Hammer Hands. Yes, I know they're called Hammer Fists. I don't care. Hammer Hands just sounds better. Say it to yourself. Hammer Hands. We're sticking with it. The hammer hands this time around are pretty similar to their Prototype 2 iteration. You can bash people into paste, just like in the first game, but they also come equipped with special medium-range spike attacks, an ability that was previously associated with the claws in the first game, but are now attached to the hammer hands. Oh god, I just love saying it every time. You can also, of course, heave your fucking hammer hands halfway across the city, because it wouldn't be a Prototype game if you couldn't. Power number 4, the claws. These guys were a shoo-in. As the first power to ever be acquired in the series, the claws always deserves a place in the arsenal. Like in Prototype 2, these guys come equipped with a pounce attack that you can use to quickly get yourself close to an enemy within optimal range of clawing. Not much to say here, honestly. Claws gonna be claws. And now for power number 5, the best thing Prototype 2 had to give us. The motherfucking tendrils. These things are goddamn amazing, and I want to keep them very close to how they functioned in Prototype 2, but with an added dimension that I'll be going into detail about a bit later. Everything you love about the tendrils is still intact. Every attack still implodes fools with the devil's fingers. It still includes the bomb attack that uses tendrils to draw in physics objects to bombard your target. You can still impregnate fools with tendril bombs. It's all there. So now we arrive at number 6. The new stuff. The weird stuff. Power number 6. Body blades. So when I say this one's new, that's not entirely true. There are a lot of elements of the muscle mass power incorporated into the body blades, from the look of the arms to the way the late game attacks with muscle mass will just explode chunks of NPCs on contact. That's gotta be in there somewhere, so it's coming with this power. That being said, there is one key difference that separates muscle mass and the body blades. That difference being that every attack in a body blades combo would turn Alex Mercer's arms and legs into something different. For example, a simple 3-hit light attack combo would involve Alex turning his arm into a thin sword for the first slash, a scythe for the second, and then turn his leg into a razor-sharp spike for the final kick. Light attacks for the body blades would involve Alex quickly transforming his arms into more basic weapons like swords, scythes, spikes, and small hammers, while the heavy attacks would involve beefier weapons with broader attack radiuses like great hammers, broadswords, maces, and flails. Shit would be dope. Alright, power number 7, the Contaminators. Now this one I am very excited about. Prototype 2 snuck in the idea of controlling separate entities with the ability to summon hunters to your side that will fight for you, and the Contaminators take that idea to fucking 11. As you can see, the Contaminators kinda resemble the claws, but with these barbed, needle-like tips. There is a reason for this. Every attack from the Contaminator will immediately change standard NPCs into blacklight zombies that will fight by your side. Alright, picture this. You're stuck in a battle with 3 hunters, and you're low on health. You could grab some living health packs and squeeze the juices out of them, but the absorption process takes time, and your kill animations keep getting interrupted by these fuckers. What to do? Whip out the Contaminators and mash the light attack button in the middle of a crowd, and all of a sudden you got 10 zombies all ganging up on these hunters. Press the heavy attack button for radial moves that shoot the needles out of Alex's hands at 360 degrees around him into the crowd, and that number quickly doubles to 20. Keep doing that, and soon enough the screen will be flooded with upwards of 50 zombies, taking out their viral aggression on anything and everything that stands against you. Look at how many NPCs are on the screen in this original game. That's gotta be at least 50. Prototype came out in fucking 2009. Can you imagine what the technology of today could do with a screen packed full of NPCs? If we could get to 50 a decade ago, I bet we could go into the hundreds these days. I can't even fucking fathom how awesome it would feel to run through a crowd of hundreds of million NPCs, just tearing through them with the Contaminators, and then sitting back and watching all the chaos you created unfold from the rooftops above. That shit would just not get old. Power number 8, the ooze. Alright, this is where shit gets really weird, and I'm not sure if you guys are gonna like it, but please do keep an open mind as I describe this nutso-ass bullshit. When I was thinking about new powers for Alex Mercer, I ended up posing this question to myself. If Alex Mercer can convert biomass into solid forms, why can't he convert it into liquid and gases as well? The answer to that question is, Alex Mercer is a made-up character with fake-ass superpowers, so there is no reason he wouldn't be able to do that shit. That train of thought led me to create 2 powers, one of which is the ooze. The other I'll be describing shortly. So the ooze would essentially look like water bending. Alex would summon up a black and red sludge from the ground in front of him and kinda psychically manipulate it to toss waves and splashes of liquefied biomass onto his enemies. Light attacks would be smaller slashes, and heavy attacks would involve moves more along the lines of summoning up walls of pulsating ooze and smashing people between them. So the more you slather up an enemy with ooze, the slower they'll move and attack. But that's not all. The ooze is also highly acidic. and very corrosive. You run through a Blackwatch base with this equipped and splash some of this black death onto the soldiers that inhabit it, and soon enough, you'll have a riot on your hands of people running around in futile circles as they slowly melt into gory puddles. I know it's kinda hard to imagine. I hope some of the illustrations have helped me get the idea across, because, I don't know, it looks awesome in my head. Power number 9, Toxin. The sister power of the ooze, Toxin is all about manipulating viral gases produced via some kind of scientific thing happening inside Alex Mercer's body. Alex's arms become covered in these gross, undulating fungal pustules that eject concentrated blasts of skin-melting gas. The light attacks are centralized blasts, more appropriate for a single target, and the heavy attacks shoot out wider blasts in a cone shape, similar to a shotgun spread. Much like the Contaminator, Toxin will turn enemies to your side to fight for you, but unlike the Contaminator, that ability is not built in and requires an upgrade to this power. Fucking semantics, the game does not exist. Oh my god, why am I doing that? So, if you want Toxin to convert enemies into raging zombies that will fight for you to the death, you can have that. But if you just want some classic skin melting, you can do that too. And here we are at power number 10, which might very well be the weirdest and hardest to swallow. I present to you the Gobs. Yes, the name is ridiculous as shit, but as a placeholder, so let's just focus on what these things can do right now. The Gobs transform both of Alex's arms into hungry, gnashing beasts. Think the darkness here. It's basically that, except on the protagonist's arms instead of out of his back. These grotesque Gobs will lash out at an intermediate distance and tear people to pieces during their light and heavy attacks. They hold something around maybe a third of the range of the Whip Fists. They still deal mostly up close. And man, I can only imagine the sickening fucking consume animations you could put together for these bad boys. But there's much more to the Gobs than just medium-range dismemberment. They have their own ranged attack and devastator attack that involves them expanding in size and detaching from Alex's body, allowing them to slither through the streets and go to town on anything they can get their teeth on. So there you have it. 10 melee powers, 5 new, 5 old. But hey, we are not even close to being done yet. That final weapon is a great segue into our next topic, ranged weapons. So the Gobs double as a ranged weapon when they're not being used for melee purposes. Press the left trigger to aim and the camera will pull into a much closer camera view so that you can aim over the shoulder, much like the new Spider-Man game. I feel like I'm gonna be mentioning that one a lot. Now, that feature, aiming over the shoulder with the left trigger, might not work in this game, simply based on the scale of everything that's always happening on screen. Zooming in might make things a bit too cluttered. There's a reason the camera's pulled out so far in Prototype, and there's a reason you can lock onto things with the click of a button. It's just because there's too much fast-paced craziness to get in close. It might be jarring. But hey, the new Spider-Man game did a great thing and slowed down time when the player aimed with the left trigger. So maybe implementing that would work to make shooting and manually aiming a little easier amongst the chaos of the city. So back to the topic of ranged powers, how you activate one of these ranged abilities is very simple. You'll have one favorited in the weapon wheel, and that'll immediately equip when you hold L2 to aim. You can also, of course, personally equip any ranged weapon for use outside of holding L2 by using the weapon wheel. Press square and triangle for fire and alternate fire on a ranged weapon, and there you have it. We'll get into the actual specifics of each ranged weapon momentarily, but before we do, I feel like I have to clarify a few things about the control scheme of this new hypothetical prototype. We're gonna take it back to the melee stuff for a second. In the original game, the first prototype, you would equip a weapon, and you had a light attack and a heavy attack. In the second game, you could assign 2 weapons at once, both of which would be dedicated to one button, whereas the first game gave each weapon 2 dedicated attack buttons, so you could mix and match moves for combos. That's something I want to return to. I want to make every single power feel individualistic, and I feel like the best way to do that is to allow the player to experience each weapon with 2 separate attack buttons. Personal choice, I just think the first game works better in that regard. You know what? Fuck it. What am I doing? Here's the control. Just look at it. Also, this is temporary. So, got it? Good, let's move on. So as you can tell by the control scheme and my previous needless ramblings, each weapon has 2 attack buttons, including ranged weapons. Man, I could have summed that shit up in like 1 sentence. Let's just move on to the actual goddamn abilities. So, the first ranged weapon we are going to talk about are the globules. The mouth arm power we discussed earlier can spit up 2 kinds of globulars, sticky and explosive. The sticky globs are the main mode of fire and can be used for a wide variety of purposes. You can slow down enemies by coating them in this stuff, you can weigh down a helicopter and bring it crashing down to earth, things like that. Globs can also be stuck to each other to create walls and clunky structures that enemies, NPCs, and cars will get stuck in if they make contact. That's the main use of the globs, sticking to enemies and the environment to make it harder for foes to navigate and get to you to cause damage. The alternative fire is an explosive glob that can be charged for a bigger explosion and will of course do damage to enemies on impact. It'll also cause a chain reaction of normal globs if they're shot at one, so hypothetically you could do stuff like build up a sticky pillar of globs and then hit it with an explosive attack to cause a massive chaotic chain explosion. It's pretty much the glue gun from Prey if the glue gun also shot grenades, kinda. Doesn't feel like it makes a whole lot of sense when I say it like that, but I hope you get it. Moving on to ranged power number 2, we have the spikes. The spikes essentially function as Alex's fucked up body's version of a shotgun or a rifle. He'll quickly shoot out hardened biomass spikes at a semi-automatic pace that can barrage heavy enemies when they're not outright pinning low-level enemies to walls and flipping cars with their force. You can charge up the standard square attack to launch a shotgun-esque cone of spikes in front of Alex. A pretty straightforward power, all things considered. As I previously mentioned, each ranged power has 2 attacks, square and triangle, so the triangle attack for the spikes is the classic ground spike, but now you can aim it and have it hit specific points while aiming with L2. On to the final ability of the ranged trio, we have the needles. The needles are a ranged version of Contaminator needles, so I'm sure you can tell what this one does. It's fully automatic and shoots out spikes that will slowly poison heavier enemies and eventually convert them to your side, so they'll attack anything that's attacking you. In a way, it would probably look like that gun from Prey that if you shoot somebody, it like fills their health bar up slowly, and if their health bar is consumed by this new green health bar, they'll like explode, but in this game's case, they wouldn't explode, they would just turn to your side and help you fight. With the secondary triangle attack, you can shoot out what are essentially chemical smoke bombs that will immediately convert any low-level enemies within the blast radius to passive, helpful little zombies. So, that's 13 powers so far. We still have plenty more to get through, so let's talk armor. Alright, so in the original games, you had one suit of armor that you could throw on during dire situations to tank damage and cause extra damage at the cost of your speed, glide, and your super jump to a degree. That is still in there. The classic prototype armor is the first set you unlock, but there are also 2 more in the game. Think of them as your light, medium, and heavy armor sets, all built for different situations this time. Here's a shitty sketch of what your light armor set would look like. Alex would shed biomass and become a smaller, more monstrous-looking creature, kind of like Carnage. The benefits of this armor set are faster speeds than ever before. Your base movement without even holding down the run button is quick as shit. You'll automatically run up walls and attach to them, and it also adds unique, faster kill animations. So if you're right on the brink of death, it might be best to turn into this little crazy-ass goblin and avoid gunfire and explosions for a minute to retreat, or to tear through a small crowd of enemies to regain health. This hyper-heightened speed and agility does come at a cost though. You can't use any of your normal 10 melee powers here. As you can see by my wacky little drawing though, this bad boy has razor-sharp fangs and claws that serve as the main weapon when this armor set is equipped, and he shambles around using spider legs that shoot out of his back when holding the run button, kinda like this classic piece of concept art from, I think, the second prototype game? I'm not sure if this is legitimate concept art, but if it is, it looks fucking awesome, and we're gonna repurpose the unused good shit. That's what we're doing here. The intermediate armor set, the classic one, functions pretty much exactly how it did in the first 2 games. You can still use all your powers, it's mostly just there to make you look and feel even more badass than before. Well suited for many situations, you know the deal. Now, the final armor ability, the heavy set, turns your ass into a 12-foot tall biomass beast. I like to call it the Flesh Monster. Much like the light armor set, you can't use your main powers here, but that's okay, because giant death spikes emerge out of your forearms when you attack. Who needs hammer hands when you are one giant hammer? So essentially, this is a limited form, only accessible through the use of the Devastator points at the end of your health bar. You have to have full 110%, 120% health to activate this final form. But when you do, you are fucking unstoppable, at least for a while. Picking up and exploding tanks with one hand, jumping directly into helicopters to blow them to Kingdom Come, smashing through the corners of buildings like they're low-budget papier-mâché movie sets. This would be the true form of the Destructor. Alright, done talking armor, but Jesus Christ, that's not all, folks. Devastator attacks. We got 5 this time. 3 old and 2 new. We're keeping the Spike Devastator and the Tendril Devastator, because those are classics and they're awesome. They'll both function pretty much exactly the same as before, except now when your tendrils make contact with low-level enemies during the Tendril Devastator, they'll explode from the inside out, in classic tendril fashion. So you'll have a nice gory display to look on when you're finished. That might have been the case in Prototype 2, I can't remember. So now for our 3 new Devastators. These 3 new attacks are based around the Ooze, Toxin, and the Mouth Arms. The Ooze Devastator involves Alex rising up on a pillar of black liquid and then slamming it down, basically causing a miniature acid tsunami. It would flood down streets and squelch off building tops onto civilians. Shit would be despicable. Now, Devastator number 2 is Toxin-based and involves Alex slamming his fists into the ground, much like the Spike Devastator, but instead, giant, disgusting biomass mushrooms burst out of the ground. I'm not kidding. I'm talking like 20 feet tall. These things would be fucking gross. From that point on, these massive fungal monstrosities would eject huge bursts of gas that would convert anyone within their radius to your side to fight for you. That is, until the mushrooms have been annihilated by you or your enemies. You could basically gas like a whole city block and get like 200 zombies on your side with this ability. Our final Devastator involves letting the gobs off the chain. The chain being your arms. The gobs increase to about triple their normal size and rip themselves off of Alex's body. It's basically like letting loose 2 bloodthirsty chain chomps that would just wreck shop. They'd go after any and all enemies they could get their mouths on, but they can also be explicitly directed by the player to attack whatever Alex has targeted. You can do this by pressing the Devastator button again after the gobs have been released. And there you have it. Those are our 5 extremely brutal and ridiculous Devastator attacks. Our final issue on the agenda today is firearms, which is something you just gotta have in a prototype game. I'll keep it simple with 6 basic firearms that you can pick up in the field. Pistol, assault rifle, LMG, rocket launcher, minigun, railgun. 6 simple firearms for added flavor. The firearms always kinda got the short end of the stick in the original games, but hopefully with the addition of a few more interesting weapons and some over-the-shoulder aiming, people might actually pick up the guns a little more often.
A new take on Traversal.
Now that we've done a full-on breakdown of the 27 different ways you can tear your enemies to pieces in this game, let's talk about the other core pillar of Prototype's gameplay experience, Traversal. First and foremost, of course, Alex still has his traditional mad hops. Jumping in Prototype is one of the most satisfying actions I have partaken in. Jumping in Prototype is awesome, and it has to stay that way. And we're going back to the first game's jumping style. We're not doing that muddy, hold A down while jumping to continue the ascent shit. The first game's jumping mechanic was perfect, the second's was worse. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So obviously, Alex has to have super jumps, air dashes, and wall runs in his arsenal, but what else can we add to make moving through the city a bit more interesting? Well, first things first, in my opinion, the glide should be expanded to include a dive bomb feature, similar to Batman Arkham, so you can fly through the city longer than ever once it's fully upgraded. Imagine Just Cause 4's wingsuit mechanics, but the grapple is Alex's fucking arm, and the wingsuit is made of flesh and bone. I actually like the subtle effect that the glide has in the first game. I don't think we need to go as far as to give Alex literal wings. Venom proves how goddamn ridiculous that could look, so I'd want to keep those original glide visuals and expand upon them somehow. More comprehensive gliding seems like an obvious next step for me, but I also have one other idea that I'm not really sure about. Let me lay it on you. And also, don't be afraid to call me out on this. If you think this next thing, or really anything in this video, wouldn't work in a prototype game, tell me. I want to know what you guys think. Basically, what it comes down to is Spider-Man web swinging. Not a glamorous way to put it, but it's the truth. Alex could shoot out a tendril and swing from it, or he could pull himself towards whatever he's aiming at or whatever he has targeted at the moment, similar to the web dash or web strike attack from various Spider-Man games. Time would slow down in midair when aiming, so you could precisely pinpoint the location you wanted to pull yourself towards, or you could instead just hold down the swing button to swoop around in classic Spidey style. Now, I think this could be cool. I think it would be really fucking awesome to integrate all of these moves into Traversal to the point where Alex is gliding through the city and whipping himself around corners, swinging, flying, and jumping with the aid of this more precise method of tendril-based movement. Jumping in Prototype is amazing, but it's not always accurate. It's very easy to undershoot and or fly way the fuck over a location when the jump is fully upgraded, so I think it could be a really good thing for gameplay to have an ability that lets you swing and basically dying light grapple to walls, rooftops, and enemies. But I also think this idea could be a total waste of time and resources. Spider-Man already has that swinging mechanic fucking locked down. He has since 2004, so it'd be really hard to nail down a unique style of swinging that didn't immediately make you think, shit, when did I start playing a Spider-Man game? Although, I'm sure a similar argument could be made about the jumping mechanics that transferred over from Hulk Ultimate Destruction to Prototype. Alex Mercer is basically just an emo reskin of the Hulk, but you know, I don't want to go from Alex is just the Hulk to Alex is just the Hulk and also just Spider-Man and also Batman. That doesn't necessarily feel like a step forward to me. But, again, to contrast my own point for the third or fourth time like a schizophrenic, I do think turning Alex Mercer into a combination of all of these characters and their individual traversal mechanics with new little twists could result in something really amazing to play. Prototype is already awesome to run around in, so wouldn't adding in a bit of Web of Shadows and Arkham City only add to that awesomeness? I don't know. You tell me. Those are my basic ideas for Traversal. Essentially, it comes down to adding in a more comprehensive gliding system, as well as tendrils that can be used to both broadly swing from buildings and more precisely traverse the environment while gliding or jumping or running pretty much at any given moment.
Sound off for at least Tornado 5 approaching.
A reactive environment.
Next on today's discussion docket is the environment of our fake-ass game. Now before we get into it, let's really quickly break down what made the environment of the original game interesting. See what we can keep from that and iterate upon. Something I loved about the original game was that New York was one seamless island in which you could just run from one end to the other. Sure, that seems like a given the new Spider-Man game, but I gotta remind you in case you've forgotten, Prototype 2 divided up its world through loading screens, which is something we are not gonna fucking do. It makes no goddamn sense for a character that can jump a mile into the fucking sky to have to take a helicopter to the other side of town. That's too dumb. As Steve said in another video I made,
ban all loading screens, but until all loading screens get banned, avoid needing them so much.
So, of course, we're going to be keeping that seamless environment around. But what made that seamless environment of the original so intriguing was that it was consistently varied. There were 4 different states of the city that you could run through. We have classic New York, Black Watch occupied territory, goddamn zombie territory, and something in between. I was never entirely clear exactly what these green parts of town signified. Maybe parts of the city that already have been destroyed by the plague, like husks of neighborhoods. Let's call it neighbor husks? Nah, but it's probably just a different way of representing an infected part of town. It either turns red or green. You had these 4 types of areas that would consistently shift locations and work against each other. It really made NYZ feel like a living, breathing city racked with an unstoppable plague that was constantly on the move and getting worse with every passing day. This variety and sense of movement as different parts of town succumb to or fight back the virus based on who and how you kill is a really fucking cool idea, and that's gonna stay around. So basically what we're looking at here, in terms of the overall environment, is a city, not New York, we're not doing New York again, Spider-Man owns that shit now. We have a seamless and shifting cityscape that reacts to how you play through environmental changes. Say you take out a couple of Blackwatch bases on a whim because you don't like their stupid goggles. Well, now that part of town doesn't have the resources to defend itself, so it's gonna get fucked by zombies real quick. Now, I'm honestly not sure if the original Prototype's environment was that reactive or not. I think Blackwatch zones and zombie zones just kind of popped up and moved around as the game progressed, regardless of if you tried to sway the conflicts to one side or the other, but I'm gonna take that core idea and just run with it. I think the easiest way to update this system for a more modern game would be to simply expand upon it and make it more tangible, integrating more phases of infection and types of environments that could occur mostly through the player's interaction with the world. For example, say you destroy a bunch of hives in an infected part of town. Instead of immediately turning into Blackwatch occupied territory, maybe we have a phase in between the two where Blackwatch soldiers begin to occupy more desolate streets for a couple of in-game hours as they try to rebuild their defenses in this recently brutalized section of the city. Here's a wacky little diagram I've worked up about how the city could react based on the player's actions. Take a look. You may immediately understand this just by looking at it, but I'll break it down for you just in case. Let's start on the left side with regular New York. Now, just to be clear, I don't want the third game to take place in New York for a third time. I'm just using NY as a placeholder city to make things a little easier to understand. Alright, so regular New York. You know what it looks like, it's this. It's on the screen. Regular NY can evolve into 3 main types of environments, those types being Blackwatch territory, occupied by soldiers, Blacklight territory, where the zombies roam, and Disputed territory, where there's a constant battle for supremacy. Blackwatch territory can evolve into a second phase of Blackwatch occupation, which involves more security, more enemies, and new militaristic bases and structures. Blacklight territory, if left unchecked, can evolve into a no man's land, and eventually an all-out fucking wasteland full of burned-out husks of zombies and corpses and body bags just lining the smoky streets. No Man's Land, which is the phase right before what I am simply calling wrecked, would basically be an even more intense zombie landscape than traditional Blacklight territory, filled with special enemies and giant biomass tendrils stretching across the skyline, almost absorbing buildings entirely. Now, as you can see, there are in-between phases that appear as a result of the player doing whatever they want to whatever part of town they want. There's Blackwatch Disputed and Blacklight Disputed territory, and those are smaller variations on the normal disputed parts of town, basically showing off a bit more dominance of either side. This means either Blackwatch or the virus itself is currently winning the battle for that part of town, and eventually that could result in that disputed territory becoming Blackwatch or Blacklight based, depending on who wins out in that section of the map. But if that battle continues for an extended period of time without the player interfering or swaying the tide to one side or the other, these disputed territories can become all-out war zones, filled with all kinds of enemies from both sides, absolute chaos incarnate. These would be very fun parts of town to play in, I can say that much. If this war zone stays active for long enough, it'll eventually result in that part of town becoming wrecked. You know, just filled to the brim with piles of corpses. Essentially, what this system boils down to is a more elaborate and idealized version of Prototype 1's systems. As I've said several times now, the city of Prototype 3 would evolve over the course of the game based on the player's actions. That being said, in a perfect world, this is a system that would work on its own, without player interaction. The virus and the fight for the city will play out, and certain parts of the town will succumb or fight back the Blacklight infection, even if the player is trying to keep a low profile and cause minimal chaos. Although I don't know why you'd want to do that. Now, I must say, before we conclude this particular part of the discussion, this would be a fucking complicated as shit system to construct. The first issue that immediately comes to mind is mission placement. What if a mission begins in a Blackwatch part of town that's supposed to be an infected-based mission, or vice versa? But talking about the potential flaws in this system would add another 10 minutes to this discussion, so let's fucking move on. Okay, so now that we've gone over the first key bullet point of Prototype 3's environment, which is the newer, more dynamic system of the evolution of the environment, let's talk about the second, equally important new addition to the series: permanent environmental interaction. Not only does the city evolve in response to how you play, the look of the city explicitly changes when you use your powers. For example, I'm sure you remember the ground spike devastator from both games, right? You slam down your fists and 20-foot tall spikes emerge out of the ground around Alex or James, impaling anything within the radius. Now, in the original games, that's it. Devastator's over. You've dealt your damage and the spikes disappear. In Prototype 3, I want that shit to stick around, ideally, forever, or until they're destroyed by the player or something else. Imagine looking over a city after 15 hours of play and seeing the results of your own misdeeds spread throughout the city. If you blasted off the corner of a building 2 hours in, that corner ain't getting fixed. It's never getting fixed. The damage you cause to the environment stays around, and if you're a careless player who loves to cause absurd amounts of destruction, you'll be able to see that shit reflected in the awful state of the environment you inhabit. Another example, the tendrils. When you attack somebody with that ability, they literally fucking explode from the inside out and are subsequently strung up by disgusting fleshy webs. That's all well and good. It's actually awesome, as a matter of fact. But I was always disappointed by how quickly things like that would disappear. In Prototype 3, hypothetically speaking, if you wrecked an entire block with your tendrils, those bodies are gonna hang there for a long time, and turn the area into a no-fly zone for helicopters. You'll be able to come back to any point, at any point, and bear witness to the carnage you've created over the course of your playthrough. Now, of course, there would be plenty of technical and design issues to overcome when implementing a system like this. It's not as simple as just flicking the keep everything around switch on. Creating an environment that consistently and permanently changes in response to your in-game actions would be fucking difficult, and it might make the game easy to break, but I think trying to work in more longevity to the environmental damage you cause would be worth the time and effort, as it would perfectly fit the brutal tone of the series, as well as just make you feel like a true blue dispenser of death and doom. So that's pretty much that, but before we move on to the story, I want to make a brief note about environmental destruction in particular. While admittedly there is nothing more satisfying in a game than being able to completely tear down a fucking building, it often seems that games that don't focus entirely on that concept come up a little short. I do want the city of Prototype 3 to be malleable and destructible to some extent, but it wouldn't be anything like what, say, Crackdown 3 tried to promise. Because we all saw how that shit panned out. They couldn't get that mode out the door and cut that shit out with a scalpel. Repurposed it though recently. That was pretty cool. That was like a fun little game mode, I guess. Either way, in Prototype 3, you would be able to do simpler stuff, like, say, blow the corner off a building, or collapse a roof to reveal the top floor of a skyscraper, or knock the signs off of building sides into the streets, you know, like the ones in Times Square. Nothing too procedural. We're not going to be creating a fucking Red Faction Guerrilla Geomod system for this game. We'd have buildings built in specific ways with specific parts to tear off that would or wouldn't collapse based on what you do. Simple, consistent destruction to make the player feel awesome.
Prototype. Take 3.
Okay, here's my dilemma with the story of this game. There are so many ways to go with this plot. There are so many things you could do with this franchise as a whole that I'm having a lot of trouble deciding which path to take. I've had countless different outlines written up about this story, all pretty different from one another, but either way, as I see it, there's 4 real ways we could go about rebooting Prototype from a story perspective. A. We reboot the first game and retell the origins of Alex Mercer pretty much beat for beat, with a more self-aware, less self-serious tone and a few new plot points to keep the audience guessing. B. We completely redo the story and origins of Alex Mercer from the ground up, basically turning him into a new character. I'll discuss why this does and doesn't make sense in a second. Option C. We tell a new linear story with a new protagonist, while maintaining the premise and themes of the original series. And finally, Option D. We create a whole new story with a whole new character who can then be changed into a better or worse character via the player's decisions in-game. So, as you can see, I'm having multiple problems here. The 2 main problems being if the game should star Alex Mercer or not, and if Alex isn't the main character, if we can change this new character through our own decisions in the story. All of this rambling led me to the question, what are the pros and cons of bringing back Alex Mercer into the franchise for a 3rd game? Well, starting off with the pros, he's instantly recognizable. Alex Mercer is Prototype, in my opinion, and just seeing him in action would instantly bring on some heavy nostalgia for fans of the old games. Another pro is we could possibly answer some questions that were left unanswered by the original games. Shit about Pariah and all that, I don't really care, but some people would be into that. But besides those 2 points, well, let's just get to the cons. First off, Alex Mercer is a fluid character. And by that I mean somebody fucked him up in the 2nd game. Sure, he never had fucking James Bond charisma, but there was something weirdly appealing about the shifty, unexpectedly low-key and melancholy demeanor of original Alex. In the 2nd game, he's just a fucking mustache-twirling villain, and it totally killed his character, which I think is something most fans can agree on. That being said, we can't pretend Prototype 2 didn't happen, because it did. There are 2 different Alex Mercers in this franchise, and bringing him back for a 3rd time, subsequently changing him and redoing him differently again, could end really, really badly. And honestly, why bother redoing Alex Mercer? If we're gonna do a reboot and tell a different version of his original story, put some new hubcaps on that bitch, why does it need to star Alex specifically? Anyone can wear a fucking hoodie, and those powers will look cool on anyone. We at least established that with James Heller, so what would be the point? Bringing back Alex Mercer brings with him all the baggage from those first 2 games. And I think it could get really unnecessarily confusing if written incorrectly, right? But, I don't know. There's just something about Alex Mercer, man. There is a kernel of something awesome in there, and if we could just pop that kernel, maybe we could have a really memorable protagonist on our hands. And then, again, there's the entirely sideline possibility of just doing a whole new story, which might be what the series needs at this point. We want to attract new players to the series, so would tying this 3rd entry into the first 2 after, like, a decade, would that really be a good idea? There'd be so much explaining and exposition to get through, and I really don't want another game filled with scenes of people standing in rooms and talking. Why the fuck does an experience with gameplay like this have cutscenes that feel like I'm watching Star Trek the Motion Picture? So, as you can see, I'm just going around and around in circles, asking myself if I should tie the new game back into the originals, if I should reboot it, if I should make a new character, or if I should just use Alex again. God, it's just been really difficult for me to pin this down. I've written this section of the script 3 times. First draft, it was all about doing a faithful reboot of the original story starring Alex. Second draft included a brief write-up of an entirely new story I'd constructed, new characters, new enemies, but it still maintained aspects of the original lore and retained the themes of the first 2 entries into the franchise. This time around, maybe the third time's the charm, because I've had a mild epiphany. I think I've come to a decision. No more flip-flopping. Remember those 4 options I posed a few minutes ago about how we could go about rebooting the franchise? Well, after too much thought, I just said, fuck it. It's not even gonna be a reboot. Instead, this non-existent game will canonically be the 3rd entry in the Prototype series, taking place after 1 and 2, starring Alex Mercer once again. BAM! For sure, I made the decision. Now I get to make everybody mad. He'll be dealing with some kind of conspiracy-ish Blackwatch plot. I have not figured out the specifics yet, but I want to let you guys in on why I made the decision to keep Alex, and what it entails for the new game. I think some of you might really like this premise. It's ridiculous. So to just briefly describe what happens in the plot, you play as Alex Mercer from the beginning of the game. Throughout the course of the game, you'll be fighting Blackwatch's newest living instrument of death, a man with powers much like Alex, who wears a helmet to disguise his face. Looks a bit like the Specialist, minus the hilarious cock grapple. About a third of the way into the game, you rip this new enemy's helmet off of his head in the midst of battle, and it reveals none other than Alex fucking Mercer. Yeah, that one. There are 3 living versions of Alex Mercer in this game. The one from the first, the one from the second, and the one you'll be playing as in Prototype 3. This twist does 5 different things at once. Let me break it down. 1. It explains Alex's radically different behavior in the second game. 2. It's a meaningful way to give in-game context to our new Alex's personality. 3. Calls back to the old games, satisfies the fanboys. 4. It's a fun twist for newcomers that don't know about the old games and wouldn't expect it, and might even get people interested in playing the first 2 again. And 5. Most importantly, it fits the more self-aware, gonzo, dark comedy type of story that I would love to tell. So there you go. This game is Prototype 3, and it stars 3 different Alex Mercers. In the last chunk of the game, you would team up with the original Alex to fight the second game's version of the character, who also still has a bit of James Heller fighting inside of him. James lost the Battle of Wills there, and was eventually taken back over by evil Alex, so that could turn him into an even more dynamic, almost kind of Two-Face or Venom-like character. Now, real quick, what this means for our third story in terms of the canon of the previous games is that Alex from Prototype 2 was born when the original virus Alex was blown to bits at the end of the first game. We saw Alex number 1 reform at the end of that game, but at the same time elsewhere, this more corrupted Alex was also born from another chunk of OG Alex's destroyed body. How the third one came about, I'm not sure. Haven't really worked that shit out entirely yet. Maybe we can put together the story together in the comments. Okay, so 3 different Alexes, 3 different characters. OG Alex is still gritty and gloomy, Alex number 2 is still villainous, but a little less embarrassing, and Alex number 3, the new guy, well, that motherfucker is basically Dante. Doom Guy would be another good comparison. I use these 2 as examples because what I want to do with Alex is realize his full potential. When people think back to what they loved about his character in the first game, I inevitably hear the word badass get dropped. And people think this because during gameplay, when you are controlling him, Alex Mercer is a fucking badass. But when you get to the story stuff, there's a hard disconnect to how you play the game and how your character behaves during cutscenes. It's a prime example of ludonarrative dissonance. Man, 2 years into making these editorial videos and I finally get to use that phrase. I'm very happy right now, I feel like a big boy. The way we mend this dissonance, at least in terms of Prototype, is to make the character just as badass in the cutscenes as he is when you are directly controlling him. This would result in a more fun, loose kind of character. He's not going to be Deadpool, he's not going to be cracking jokes left and right, but much like Dante or Doom Guy, I want Alex number 3 to constantly be doing stuff that just makes you go, That is how I would write Alex Mercer, as a genuinely badass and fun-to-watch character who knows how powerful he is, and maybe even enjoys it a little, God forbid. And shit, if you don't like this version, Alex, you can't complain because you got the original 2 versions kicking around in the story as an integral ally as well as a central antagonist. As for the tone of the story, I think I want to strike a balance between the first and the second game, but add a bit of my own flavoring, some of my spices. It would definitely not be as self-serious or intricately plotted as the first game, but there's still going to be some intrigue and mystery in there. It's not just the twists with the 2 Alexes, there's more in there that I'm still working out. The military conspiracy Jason Bourne kind of vibe of the first game is unique and worth keeping around, so I'm gonna do that. It's just gonna be a little different this time. But either way, this would still be a fucked up world where fucked up dramatic things can happen. The brutality of the first game would be left intact, but there'd also be a new element of self-aware humor and over-the-top badassery. Something I feel would be absolutely perfect for a series about a man who can transform his hands into fucking hammers and murder people while assuming the form of a 90-year-old Betty White-looking motherfucker. Serious just doesn't work here, at least not on its own.
In conclusion,
Holy shit, it's finally done. I'm not sure how to end this, honestly. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on endlessly about my reboot, my reimagining, my sequel, whatever the fuck you want to call it, all of my ideas for a new prototype game. This is a franchise that more than deserves another shot at the limelight, and I think that potentially, if some of the ideas I brought up were in fact implemented into a new prototype experience, we'd have something pretty dope on our hands. Before we wrap things up for good, let's narrow down all this chatty-Cathy bullshit to a few key bullet points. Get one final look at what this game would be, from like a big picture standpoint. Bullet point number 1, a wider variety of weapons, powers, and armor transformations than ever before. Fully realize the potential of Alex Mercer's shape-shifting abilities with 27 different ways to murder your makers. Bullet point number 2, new and improved means of traversal, including more elaborate gliding mechanics and tendril-based movement. Bullet point number 3, a constantly evolving environment that reacts to the chaos you cause in multiple ways. And bullet point number 4, an appropriately ridiculous story, one that the series has always deserved, a story that suits the crazy-ass gameplay of Prototype. So there you have it. That is how I would make Prototype 3. I'm sorry we didn't really get into stealth, but the video, look at that. How are you still here even? Either way, thanks for making a game with me. That's a shitty final line.